So it seems that as well as the tower points updates, Games Workshop have flipped the Mont'ka rule on its head and confirmed the list of the things going to Legends. Let's talk about the updates for the greater good. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd just make a quick follow-on video from the tower points update that we talked about yesterday. As well as that, it seems that we've got a rules change to the Mont'ka detachment and also the confirmed list of things going to Legends now. As mentioned, Tau Empire had their Codex Points update finally go live yesterday. It seems it was available on the app first, and then not too long after that it went live on the download section for the Warhammer community page. It doesn't really seem to have been enormously well publicised in terms of notifications or anything like that. They did drop a Start Collecting Tau article the same day, but not really anything particularly specific towards the digital updates. Looking at the Minotaur and Field manual, it does look like that tallies up exactly with the points changes on the app. Nice to know there's no confusion there. I covered all the tab points changes yesterday, so I won't go too far into that. It looks like broadly more things went up than went down in terms of important units, perhaps particularly notably Brute Carnivores going up to 75 points, Broadsides going up 20 to 110 points, and the overall combo of Breachers, Devilfish and Fireblade up 30 points were all quite big hits. It wasn't all bad news though, as a few things went down like the Lone Spear, Crutox Rampagers, and the Star Scythe and Fire Knife Crisis suits. They all went down relative to their initial printed cost in the codex. I have seen some people getting a bit confused as to the green or red arrows on the points update. Often they're quite helpful if you're comparing the previous digital update to the next one, but in this case they're really not that helpful. The only thing that those green and red arrows signify here are how they are relative to the printed codex cost, and those points costs were kind of never really live anyway, and it just kind of looks like everything's gone down given how high tower points costs were relative to their abilities earlier in 10th edition. Otherwise though, beyond the points page, we got a fair bunch of tower rules. It looks like the Legends document has been updated once again. This one has the datasheets that you'd expect from the Tower Codex, all the things that got removed and sent to Legends for various different reasons. Mostly fan-cast resin characters. We've got Longstrike, Ornvar, Ornshi, and Longstrike the Hammerhead Commander. Or just a little bit sad that they went to Legends without getting plastic kits. I guess it's not impossible that Games Workshop might bring them back at some point in the future for a later Tower release. They did that with the Chaos Lore with Jump Pack, for example. Also in the Legends document are the standard Crisis Commander, is now Enforcer or Cold Star, the ones that you can build from the actual standalone Commander kit, and the generic flexible Crisis suits are here as well, the ones where you can just choose the 3 hard points for maximal weapon loadouts, as opposed to the more rigid loadouts that you get with things like Somforge or Fire Knife or Star Scythe. In addition to all that, it is now definitely confirmed that the Tetras, Ravana, Yavara, Remora drones and the Barracuda are all indeed going to Legends. It seemed highly likely given that they weren't featured in the points cost before and they previously had been. It does seem that they are just continuing with the trend of sending Forge World things out of the game one by one, and only keeping Forge World and 40k for really big stuff they might struggle to produce otherwise, things like the Taunar Supremacy armor. Just in general, it does mean that anything in those Imperial armor sections is kind of a shaky idea to buy as a purchase for any sort of expectation to use it in-game in the long term. Certainly could make things like Eldari Shadow Spectres or Hornets kind of nervous when their codex comes around. The same for the Astra Militarum, who have a rather large Forge World range. I certainly know what you're getting into if you're collecting those at the moment, as it doesn't look like they're scheduled for long-term rule support unless they get rescued and put in plastic kits at some point. Definitely not great for using them in more mainstream 40k. You can still absolutely play them all if you're playing in casual games with the Legends rules. They're being excluded from balance updates and probably further neglected in the future isn't exactly great for them long term. Otherwise though, perhaps the more interesting and surprising update for the Tau is the change to Mont'ka. This was one that basically everyone was expecting them to update when the codex came around. I feel like overall error rate in Games Workshop's codexes has definitely dropped quite a lot in 10th edition versus 9th. In 9th edition, we were often seeing entire reams of pages worth of FAQs that went on for about 20 or 30 questions or so per codex. Now we're generally seeing 1 or 2. Though it is still a bit disappointing if they stuff up a detachment rule to the point where they need to completely rewrite it. In any case, Mont'ka is definitely a detachment that a lot of people had their eye on from the new codex. It was initially looking like perhaps one of the strongest, but just about anyone could tell from a quick read that the core rule didn't really work the way that Games Workshop had intended to. It was basically split into 2 parts. Your entire army gets lethal hits on its ranged attacks in round 1 to 3, and then your ranged weapons get the assault keyword if you're guided. The issue was with the second part, the assault keyword thing. It just didn't really interact properly with the actual faction rule for the greater good, and it meant that if your unit wanted to actually be guided in the first place, then they had to be eligible to shoot, something they wouldn't be able to if they'd advanced. It meant that technically in the interim before this was patched, you needed to have at least one assault weapon in your unit, so likely a gun drone for quite a lot of Tau units out there, though plenty of things couldn't access any of that, so couldn't use that bit of the Mont'ka rule. I did see some people arguing that that was exactly how it was intended and not a mistake in any way, but I think to most people it was absolutely clearly not the intention. That does seem to be the case though, as they seem to have fixed it by actually kind of changing the rule, rather than just fixing the wording on the assault bit of it. The way they've chosen to do it is actually kind of flip the rule on its head. Basically, they changed it so every single ranged weapon just permanently gets the assault keyword for battle rounds 1, 2, and 3, and then you only get the lethal hits bit of it if your unit is guided. On top of that, as perhaps a slightly more subtle change, they're both now clearly linked to battle rounds 1 to 3. The assault keyword bit sounded like you could potentially use it turns 4 and 5, which again seemed unlikely to be the intent, but it was the way that they'd written it. Overall, I'd say it's probably a nerf to the detachment. The lethal hits change means that your incidental non-guided fire is going to be quite a bit less scary. It was quite a nice boost for anything that wasn't being guided. For units hitting on a 4+, it means that quite a lot of your actual hits are going to be lethal hits and just bypassing the wound roll, and a fair few units that were going to be focusing on observing rather than being guided tended to have more light anti-infantry weapons where those lethal hits could be really quite big. They're just not going to get that now though, so if you want the lethal hits bit of things, you are actually going to need to guide the units that need it. And it's kind of interesting that this one goes off the guided unit as opposed to the spotted target or anything like that. So if you did have a big guided unit that had some primary weapons firing at one thing, you could still have the lethal hits go off on any incidental split fire anti-infantry guns. Say maybe a Skyray taking aim with its primary missile system, and then you could have the lethal hits on the burst cannons as its secondary weapon system targeting something else. Perhaps the biggest nerf to the thing though is that it no longer triggers an overwatch anymore, seeing as you can't be a guided unit during the enemy's movement phase, and that one actually feels like it might be one of the biggest blows to the Mont'ka detachment. It did mean that you could have some pretty crazy overwatch. Literally every hit that hits the enemy would auto wound, which I must admit maybe felt like not really the thing that they were trying to go for with the detachment, being all about aggression, hard-hitting damage, and fast movement being the themes of Mont'ka, as opposed to just having absolutely godly overwatch in the opponent's turn. I kind of wonder if it might have been that partly prompted the rules change. Otherwise, the assault keyword change is probably broadly a buff. It means that lower priority units that might be observing or just not guided in the first place can still advance and shoot, and that means they could advance and guide as well, which is handy enough. Though it does mean that there's no option anymore to gain this on turns 4 or 5, even if you're being a guided unit now. I guess that's not great for your biggest damage dealers that might really need that extra spurt of movement to get to objectives, and also likely want to be keeping up the firepower while they're doing so. Overall, I feel like it definitely changes the dynamic for Mont'ka a bit. There's a little bit more speed across all the army, though a bit less damage overall, and much worse overwatch. Overall, between all that, I still think it looks like a good detachment. Both bits of the core rule are usable, but I would still say it is overall nerfed from what it was before. They've still got some great stratagems, such as big rerolls against a foe that destroyed one of your units. That 6-inch auto advance is nice, with permanent assault across everything. And the extra AP for focus fire one is nice, and the combat debarkation for breaches, even if they went up a bit. The core rule still helps out with both damage and mobility in the early game, though I feel like Games Workshop maybe went pretty hard on the units that might have been best in Mont'ka in the points updates. Nerfs to the breaches, the devilfish, the broadsides, and the riptide won't help too much. The riptide again I did think seemed like a pretty good unit for Mont'ka, particularly liking the lethal hits on that mid-strength ion accelerator. It'd be interesting to see what Tau detachments come out on top with this. Mont'ka I did think was maybe looking like the overall best before, though I feel like after the points changes, they've probably put the Kroot hunting pack out of any real contention with the Kroot carnivore increases. But it'll be interesting to see if people still prefer Mont'ka to things like Retaliation Cadre or Cao Yon. Otherwise, for the errata, there was just one minor change to some forged suits. This was mainly just fixing wording issues on their big rerolls. They've written that you get rerolls to wound and damage on any attacks allocated to a monster and vehicle, where technically the allocation thing I think happens after the wound roll. So technically meant that rules as written you couldn't get the reroll wound rolls bit of it unless they'd updated the rule. I think basically everyone really knew what they meant. Still seem like they're going to be interesting enough, probably good enough to tighten up that loophole. They did go up from 160 to 170 in the points update though. just how scary anti-armor things seem to get hit in general. Between these and the broadsides increasing, I guess maybe Skyrays and Hammerheads might look a little bit better by comparison. Otherwise, I was just wondering if they were going to do anything with Kauyon at all. This one changed a bit in the codex, though didn't necessarily mean it wasn't working as intended. It had a slightly subtle rules change which meant that it was now the Observer and the Guided units that both get the sustained hits 2 against their spotted target, not just the Guided units, although it did mean that the Guided unit didn't get sustained hits 2 against anything that they were splitting fire on, and they still don't now. Seems that Games Workshop look like they're happy with that though. From Battle Rounds 3 onwards, Karyon's going to hit extra hard, and it means that you could potentially get sustained hits 2 across basically your entire army, including all the observing units, so pretty fearsome firepower when the trap is sprung, and the Tau players really go on the offensive late game. In any case though, let me know what you think about the Mont'ka rules change and the Legends units. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to support the channel and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.